There is a particular kind of anxiety that doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't come crashing into your life with obvious disaster or financial ruin. Instead, it hums quietly in the background. You feel it when you wake up already thinking about money. Even on days when things are objectively fine. You feel it when you work hard, deliver results, earn well, and yet something inside you never fully relaxes. It's the strange tension of doing everything right and still feeling unsettled. You may recognize this feeling intimately. On paper, your life might look stable. Your income may have grown over the years. You may even earn more now than you ever imagined you would. And yet, rest feels conditional. Peace feels delayed. It's as if your nervous system is always waiting for the other shoe to drop. You tell yourself you'll finally relax after the next paycheck, the next contract, the next good month. But somehow, that moment never arrives. Even the spaces meant for calm aren't immune. Weekends carry a subtle edge. Evenings feel slightly rushed, as if you should be doing something more productive just in case. Small wins, closing a deal, finishing a project, hitting a financial goal, bring only temporary relief before the familiar tension creeps back in. The joy fades faster than it should. Instead of savoring progress, your mind quietly moves on to what could go wrong next. This is where the pain sharpens. Your income increases, but your body doesn't seem to notice. Your bank balance grows, yet your shoulders remain tight. Your mind stays alert, scanning the horizon for risk. It's confusing because you did what you were told would work. You worked harder. You became more skilled. You became more responsible. And yet, your nervous system never learned the feeling of safety. At some point, a question begins to form, though you may not say it out loud. Why does life still feel so fragile? Why does it seem like one unexpected expense, one delayed payment, or one bad month could undo years of effort? This is the paradox that quietly haunts many high-functioning, hard-working people. From the outside, they appear successful. From the inside, they feel exposed. What makes this paradox so unsettling is that it challenges a deeply ingrained belief. We are taught, subtly and consistently, that safety comes from earning more, that stability lives just beyond the next milestone, that once you reach a certain number, a certain level, or a certain lifestyle, your worries will finally soften. But lived experience often tells a different story. Many people discover that as their income grows, their anxiety simply grows with it, sometimes in quieter, more sophisticated ways. At first, this realization can feel uncomfortable, even disappointing. It can feel like a personal failure, as if you're ungrateful or doing something wrong. You might wonder why you can't just be content when others would gladly trade places with you. But this discomfort isn't a flaw. It's a signal. It's your inner awareness noticing a gap between what you were promised and what you are actually experiencing. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, another possibility begins to surface. Maybe the issue isn't effort. Maybe it isn't ambition. Maybe it isn't even income. Perhaps the unease comes from something less visible but far more influential. Something beneath the surface that hasn't been addressed yet. Something that income alone was never designed to solve. This is where the conversation shifts from numbers to nervous systems, from earnings to emotions. Because what you may be feeling isn't fear of being broke. It's fear of unpredictability. Fear of not knowing what comes next. Fear of having no solid ground beneath the motion of your life. And the human mind, wired for patterns and predictability, does not rest well in chaos, even when the chaos is well paid. Think about how your body responds when you can't see what's ahead. Even if nothing bad is happening, uncertainty itself creates tension. This is why routines feel comforting, why rhythms calm us, why unpredictability, sustained over time, quietly exhausts us. Financial anxiety often has less to do with how much money you make and more to do with how predictable your life feels. And so you keep pushing forward, believing that one more milestone will finally unlock peace, one more achievement, one more raise, one more breakthrough. But what if safety was never waiting there? What if it was never hiding behind the next number at all? This idea can feel both unsettling and strangely relieving. Unsettling because it challenges the story you've been chasing. Relieving because it suggests that peace might be closer than you think, that the solution may not require more effort, more pressure, or more striving, that it may involve seeing money and your relationship with it through a different lens entirely. Perhaps safety isn't something you arrive at. Perhaps it's something you build quietly, gradually, often long before you realize you need it. And perhaps the moment you stop chasing it in the distance is the moment you begin to feel it in the present. Let that thought linger for a moment. Because if safety was never waiting at the next milestone, then the path forward is not about running faster, but about understanding something deeper that has been quietly shaping your experience all along. Most people grow up with a quiet assumption about money, one that feels so obvious it is rarely questioned. Safety, we are told, comes from earning more, from bigger numbers, better titles, visible progress. The logic sounds clean and reassuring. If income goes up, fear should go down. If the numbers look strong, the future should feel secure. This belief is repeated so often that it begins to feel like common sense rather than an idea worth examining. And yet, when you look closely at real lives, the story starts to crack. You see people who earn more than they ever imagined, yet still check their accounts with unease. You meet professionals whose income doubled over a decade, but whose anxiety simply evolved rather than disappeared. The fear didn't leave, it just changed shape. Instead of worrying about having too little, they worry about losing what they have. The lifestyle grows, the responsibilities expand, and the sense of exposure remains. This contradiction is rarely discussed honestly. From the outside, high earners are assumed to feel confident, even carefree. From the inside, many feel just as vulnerable as before, sometimes more so. Because when income is the only thing holding your sense of safety together, it feels fragile by nature. It can rise, fall, stall, or disappear. And when your peace is tied to something that moves constantly, peace itself becomes unstable. Part of the confusion lies in how visible income is compared to how invisible security feels. Income can be seen, measured, compared, and celebrated. It shows up on statements, tax forms, and social conversations. Security, on the other hand, lives quietly inside the body and mind. It shows up as relaxed shoulders, steady breathing, and the ability to sleep without rehearsing worst-case scenarios. It's harder to display, harder to brag about, and easier to ignore until it's missing. Imagine a busy highway filled with cars, trucks, and buses moving at different speeds. That movement can be impressive to watch. It looks alive, productive, and powerful. But none of that motion matters if the bridge beneath it is weak. Income is the traffic, sometimes heavy, sometimes light, sometimes fast. Systems are the bridge. They don't move. They don't attract attention, but they quietly carry the weight, regardless of what passes over them. The misunderstanding happens when motion is mistaken for stability, when flow is mistaken for foundation. A person with rising income can feel successful while standing on shaky ground, just as someone with modest income but solid systems can feel surprisingly calm. One looks impressive, the other feels secure, and in a world that rewards appearance more than experience, it's easy to chase the wrong thing. This is why so many people remain stuck despite working hard and earning more. They keep optimizing what can be measured: income, growth, output, while neglecting what can be felt: clarity, predictability, emotional steadiness. Numbers are easy to track. Feelings are not. Spreadsheets give instant feedback. Nervous systems do not, and so effort goes where validation is fastest, not where relief is deepest. Over time, this creates a strange imbalance. Life becomes busy but not grounded, productive but not peaceful. There is always motion, always urgency, always the sense that you must keep going or risk collapse. Even success feels conditional. You enjoy it briefly, then guard it nervously. The mind learns to stay alert because alertness feels like responsibility. But alertness, sustained too long, becomes exhaustion. At some point, a quieter question begins to form beneath all the striving. What does safety actually mean? Is it a number on a screen, or is it a feeling in the body? Is it something others can admire, or something you experience when no one is watching? This question doesn't demand immediate answers. It simply asks for honesty. When you pause long enough to ask it, you may notice something surprising. Moments of true calm rarely come from income spikes. They come from moments of clarity, from knowing what happens next, from understanding your rhythms, your obligations, your margins, from feeling that life is not balanced on a knife's edge, even if it's not perfect. This is not a rejection of ambition or progress. Income matters. Growth matters. But they were never meant to carry the full weight of your sense of safety. They are inputs, not foundations. When treated as foundations, they crack under pressure. When treated as flow moving across something sturdier, they become far more useful and far less stressful. The invitation here is simple but not shallow. It's an invitation to stop equating visible success with internal security, to recognize that what impresses the world does not always calm the mind, to notice where you may have been chasing numbers while quietly neglecting the structure beneath them. You don't need to answer all of this right now. You don't need to fix anything yet. Just pause and sit with the idea. Question what you've been told. Question what you've been chasing. Because the moment you begin asking what safety truly is, rather than assuming it comes from more, you open the door to a different kind of stability, one that doesn't depend on constant motion to survive. And that question, and asked honestly, is where real understanding begins. When this philosophy moves out of abstraction and into daily life, it begins to feel uncomfortably familiar. You notice it in the way your body reacts to uncertainty before your mind has time to explain it. A delayed payment tightens your chest. An irregular month interrupts your sleep. Even when nothing is technically wrong, your body behaves as if it's bracing for impact. This is where financial stress reveals its true nature, not as a spreadsheet problem, but as a lived, physical experience. Most people assume money stress is purely logical. They believe that once the numbers make sense, peace will follow. But the nervous system doesn't operate on logic alone. It operates on patterns, signals, and predictability. When income arrives irregularly or expenses feel uncertain, the body interprets that unpredictability as danger. It doesn't matter if the math says you're fine. The body is reacting to instability, not insufficiency. This is why even good months can feel strangely unsatisfying. You earn well, maybe better than expected, but the relief is brief. Instead of enjoying the moment, your mind immediately jumps ahead. Will next month be the same? Was this a fluke? Should I save more, work harder, prepare for the drop that always seems to follow? Without rhythm, success feels fleeting. It becomes something you hold tightly rather than something you trust. Think about how different life feels when you know what's coming next. When routines are steady, the mind relaxes. When schedules are predictable, the body softens. The same principle applies to money. It's not just about how much comes in, but how reliably life moves forward. Without structure, every good month feels like borrowed time. With structure, even modest income can feel surprisingly steady. This is where a small but meaningful transformation begins to take shape. Not through dramatic change, but through a subtle shift in how safety is experienced. Predictability starts calming the mind before it ever changes the bank account. When you know how your money flows, where it rests, and what it supports, the noise quiets. You stop guessing. You stop rehearsing worst-case scenarios. The nervous system finally receives a signal it understands. You are not in free fall. What's important to recognize is that emotional discipline often comes before financial discipline. Long before anyone opens a spreadsheet or builds a budget, decisions are already being shaped by feelings. Anxiety drives impulsive spending. Fear delays necessary choices. Overconfidence leads to risk taken too lightly. These patterns don't originate in numbers. They originate in emotion. And unless that emotional layer is acknowledged, no tool or tactic can fully hold. When emotional discipline is present, something changes quietly but powerfully. Decisions slow down. Reactions soften. Money stops feeling like an emergency and starts feeling like a resource. You don't rush to spend when income arrives, nor do you panic when it pauses. You begin responding instead of reacting. This shift is subtle, but it's foundational. It determines whether systems can actually work or collapse under pressure. As clarity grows, another surprising realization emerges. Structure is not restrictive, it's relieving. Many people resist systems because they associate them with limitation, control, or loss of freedom. But lived experience often reveals the opposite. Clarity creates breathing room. It removes the mental load of constant decision-making. It replaces chaos with gentle boundaries that protect your energy and attention. Consider how freeing it feels to know your calendar for the week. The structure doesn't trap you, it supports you. The same is true with money. When systems are in place, you stop carrying everything in your head. You no longer rely on memory, mood, or motivation. The system holds what your mind no longer needs to guard. This relief shows up in small moments. You check your account without dread. You make decisions without rushing. You rest without guilt. These aren't dramatic victories, but they are deeply human ones. They signal that your relationship with money is shifting from emotional strain to quiet cooperation. At this stage, the conversation naturally widens. If predictability calms the mind, what else might systems change in daily life? How might structure influence not just finances, but energy, confidence, and long-term decision-making? The idea begins to expand beyond money itself. Systems are no longer just financial tools. They are emotional stabilizers. This is where the door opens to deeper exploration. Once you see how structure reshapes everyday experience, you start noticing its absence everywhere: in rushed mornings, in reactive choices, in the exhaustion that comes from constant uncertainty. And just as importantly, you begin to sense what becomes possible when systems quietly do their work in the background. You don't need to rush ahead yet. There's no need to design anything immediately. Simply notice how your body responds to clarity versus chaos. Notice how predictability changes your emotional state before it changes your outcomes. Because this awareness, this gentle noticing, is the first step toward a different way of experiencing money. And from here, the journey moves naturally forward toward understanding what happens when effort is finally supported by structure rather than carrying the weight alone. There is a rhythm many people quietly live inside, even if they've never named it. A strong month arrives, and with it comes a brief sense of relief. You breathe easier, you feel capable again. You think, maybe this is it. Maybe things are finally stabilizing. Then a weaker month follows. Income slows. Uncertainty creeps back in. Confidence gives way to panic, and the cycle begins again. This financial whiplash is exhausting, not because of the numbers themselves, but because of what they do to the inner world. Over time, this pattern leaves residue. Each rise and fall teaches the mind something subtle but powerful. It teaches you not to trust success. Even when things go well, part of you stays guarded. You enjoy the win, but only halfway. You keep one eye on the horizon, waiting for the downturn you've learned to expect. Success stops feeling like progress and starts feeling like a temporary exception. On the surface, logic tries to intervene. It reminds you that this month was good, that the work paid off, that there's evidence you're capable of creating income again. But emotion speaks more quietly and more persistently. It whispers that good months don't last, that stability is fragile, that something will eventually undo what you've built. And because emotion lives closer to survival than logic does, its voice often wins. This internal conflict is draining in ways that are hard to explain to others. You might look productive, even successful, while feeling internally unsettled. You stay alert, constantly scanning for signs of trouble. You track numbers obsessively. You replay decisions in your head. Vigilance begins to feel like responsibility, like the price you pay for being on top of things. But vigilance is not neutral. It costs energy. It keeps the nervous system activated long after the workday ends. At first, this vigilance can feel empowering. You tell yourself that staying alert is what keeps you safe, that if you just pay close enough attention, you can prevent the next drop. But over time, vigilance becomes a quiet form of tension. It never fully switches off. It follows you into rest, into relationships, into moments meant for ease. And slowly, without realizing it, you become tired in a way that sleep alone doesn't fix. This is where effort starts to take on a new role. Instead of being a tool for growth, it becomes a substitute for stability. When things feel uncertain, you work harder. You push more. You add more projects, more hours, more pressure. Not because you want to, but because effort feels like something you can control. It gives the illusion of safety through action. As long as you're moving, it feels like you're protected. But effort has limits. It can generate income, but it cannot create calm. It can produce results, but it cannot soothe a nervous system that has learned to expect volatility. In fact, the harder you push without underlying stability, the more anxious you may become. You start associating rest with risk. Slowing down feels dangerous, as if momentum is the only thing keeping everything from falling apart. This is the contradiction many people live with, but rarely articulate. Working harder was supposed to make life easier. Instead, it often makes life more tense. You earn more, but feel less settled. You achieve more, but trust the ground beneath you less. The very strategy meant to bring security ends up reinforcing insecurity. And because effort is praised while exhaustion is hidden, this pattern goes unchallenged for years. What makes this especially difficult is that nothing is wrong in an obvious way. You're not failing. You're not irresponsible. You're doing what seems sensible, and yet something feels off. The mind understands success, but the body does not feel safe inside it. This gap between understanding and feeling is where so much financial anxiety lives. If you pause here for a moment, you may notice how deeply ingrained this tension has become, how automatic the cycle feels. Strong month, relief. Weak month, panic. More effort, more vigilance, less rest, more strain. It's a loop that feeds itself, not because you're doing something wrong, but because the foundation beneath the effort hasn't been addressed yet. This brings us to a quiet but important question. What would stability feel like if it didn't require constant tension? If you didn't have to stay alert all the time to protect it? If success could arrive without immediately triggering fear of its disappearance? These questions are not meant to be answered quickly. They are meant to be felt. Because the moment you begin imagining stability without vigilance, something shifts. You start to see that calm might not come from trying harder, but from holding life differently, from creating conditions where effort is supported, not stretched thin, where success doesn't need to be defended constantly because it rests on something steadier beneath. This is not yet about solutions or systems. It's about recognition, about seeing the cost of living in constant readiness, about acknowledging how much energy has been spent trying to outrun uncertainty, and about gently opening to the possibility that stability, real stability, may feel quieter than you expected. Let that question linger as we move forward, because understanding what stability could look like without constant tension is the doorway to everything that comes next. At some point along the way, a new belief quietly takes hold. It doesn't arrive loudly or announce itself as a problem. It slips in disguised as responsibility. The belief is this: if you pay constant attention to your money, you will stay in control. If you monitor every detail, check every balance, think through every scenario, nothing bad will surprise you. Attention begins to feel like protection. At first, this feels sensible. You track your income closely. You stay busy. You keep yourself informed. You tell yourself this is discipline, that this vigilance is what separates you from carelessness or failure. And for a while, it even feels productive. You feel involved, engaged, on top of things. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the cost of this constant attention begins to show. Busyness starts to replace clarity. Monitoring replaces meaning. You are always doing something related to money, checking, adjusting, planning, worrying, but rarely feeling settled about it. Your mind stays active even when your body wants to rest. True discipline, which should simplify life, quietly turns into a form of mental clutter. The signal gets lost in the noise. This is where fatigue sets in, not all at once, but gradually. It's the fatigue of never fully enjoying success because you're too busy guarding it. A good month arrives, and instead of celebration, you feel relief mixed with tension. You immediately start thinking about how to sustain it, how to protect it, how to prevent it from slipping away. The success is real, but the enjoyment is fleeting. Over time, this pattern reshapes how you see yourself. Income stops being just income. It becomes a scorecard, a verdict, a reflection of your worth, your intelligence, your discipline, your future. A strong month makes you feel capable and confident. A weak one makes you question yourself deeply. Money, which should be a tool, becomes a mirror, and not always a kind one. This emotional entanglement is exhausting because it's personal. Every fluctuation feels like commentary on who you are. You don't just experience financial ups and downs, you internalize them. And when income carries that much meaning, no amount of attention ever feels like enough. You stay alert, not because you want to, but because letting go feels risky. Eventually, a quieter emotion begins to surface beneath the vigilance and fatigue. It's not panic, it's grief. A subtle, unspoken grief that comes from realizing something important. Money did not deliver what you thought it would. Not because it failed, but because it was never meant to carry that promise. You believed that earning more, staying busy, and paying attention would finally bring peace. And now you're beginning to sense that peace never arrived. This realization can feel heavy. It's not dramatic, but it's deeply personal. You may feel disappointed, not in money itself, but in the story you were told about it. The story that said safety comes from constant effort, that rest must be earned and defended, that peace is something you unlock by staying vigilant long enough. Letting go of that story can feel like losing something, even if it was never fully true. As this awareness deepens, ambition and exhaustion begin to blur together. You're no longer sure whether you're pushing forward because you're inspired or because you're afraid to slow down. The line between growth and survival becomes thin. You keep moving, but you're not always sure where you're headed or why you're so tired when you get there. This is the cost of the illusion of control. When attention becomes constant, it stops being useful. When busyness replaces discipline, it drains rather than supports. When income becomes identity, it burdens rather than serves. None of this happens because you lacked wisdom or intention. It happens because you were trying to feel safe in the only way you knew how. There is no shame in this. In fact, it's a very human response to uncertainty. We pay attention to what we fear losing. We monitor what feels fragile. We stay busy when stillness feels unsafe. But recognizing this pattern is not a failure. It's a turning point. It's the moment you begin to see that control and safety are not the same thing. True safety does not require constant supervision. It does not demand that you stay mentally on call at all hours. It doesn't ask you to earn your rest through exhaustion. Instead, it creates conditions where attention can relax, where effort can be focused, where success doesn't need to be defended every moment. As this section closes, it's worth acknowledging the weight of what you've been carrying. Years of vigilance. Years of tying your sense of self to numbers that were never meant to define you. Years of mistaking constant attention for stability. This awareness is not meant to judge you. It's meant to honor the effort you've given and gently suggest that there may be a lighter way forward. You don't need to resolve anything right now. Just notice the difference between attention and peace, between busyness and discipline, between control and safety. Because once you see the illusion for what it is, you can begin to imagine a relationship with money that doesn't require you to carry so much, so tightly, for so long. There is a quiet power in simply seeing a pattern for what it is, not fixing it yet, not fighting it, just recognizing it. When awareness enters the picture, something loosens. The cycle that once felt automatic, anxiety, effort, vigilance, exhaustion, no longer feels invisible. You begin to notice it as it happens, and that alone changes the experience. What once controlled you now becomes something you can observe. This is often the turning point, not because life suddenly becomes stable, but because confusion begins to lift. You realize that the fear you've been carrying was never truly about not having enough money. It was about disorder, about not knowing what comes next, about living in a state where everything feels contingent and fragile. Chaos, not lack, was the real threat your nervous system was responding to. This realization can be surprisingly relieving. It means you're not broken for feeling anxious, despite earning well. It means your fear makes sense. The body is designed to seek patterns, predictability, and rhythm. When those are missing, it stays alert, regardless of how impressive the numbers look. Understanding this reframes the problem entirely. The solution isn't more income, it's more order. And this is where structure begins to look different. No longer as a constraint, a cage, or a loss of freedom. Instead, it starts to appear as support, like the frame of a house that allows the walls to stand without constant reinforcement. Structure doesn't limit movement. It makes movement safer. It doesn't reduce flexibility. It prevents collapse. Many people resist structure because they associate it with restriction. They imagine budgets as punishment, systems as rigidity, plans as pressure. But when structure is understood correctly, it does the opposite. It removes the need for constant decision-making. It frees mental energy. It allows you to stop bracing and start breathing. The support was always there. It just needed to be seen differently. As this perspective shifts, mindset changes begin to ripple outward. Decisions slow down. You stop reacting impulsively to every fluctuation. You pause before acting. You consider the longer arc rather than the immediate emotion. Calm replaces urgency, not because circumstances are perfect, but because your inner response has matured. You might notice this in small, everyday moments. You receive income and don't feel the urge to immediately allocate every dollar out of fear. You face an unexpected expense and respond thoughtfully instead of panicking. You say no to opportunities that drain you, even if they promise short-term gain. These are not dramatic changes, but they are deeply meaningful ones. They signal that clarity is taking root. Gradually, you begin to sense how internal order shapes external outcomes. When your inner world feels steadier, your outer choices follow suit. You make fewer emotional decisions. You conserve energy. You focus on what matters rather than what feels urgent. Life doesn't become risk-free, but it becomes navigable. This is where emotion and logic finally stop competing. For so long, they may have felt like opposing forces. Logic said you were fine. Emotion said you weren't. Logic pointed to numbers. Emotion pointed to fear. Now they begin to work together. Logic provides structure. Emotion provides signals. Together, they create wisdom. This integration is subtle but powerful. You no longer dismiss your feelings as irrational, nor do you let them run the show. You listen to them. You interpret them. You respond with intention. Money becomes less personal, less charged, less dramatic. It becomes a tool again, not a test. As understanding deepens, the tone of your inner dialogue changes. There is less self-criticism, less urgency, less pressure to constantly prove yourself. You stop equating calm with complacency and effort with worth. You begin to trust that stability doesn't require constant tension to exist. This doesn't mean life becomes perfectly predictable. Uncertainty still exists. Income still fluctuates. Challenges still arise. But your relationship with these realities changes. They no longer feel like threats to your identity or survival. They feel like variables to be managed, not disasters to be feared. There is a lightness that enters here almost imperceptibly at first. You feel less reactive, more grounded, more present. The future no longer feels like something you must outrun. It becomes something you can prepare for calmly. And preparation, when guided by clarity rather than fear, feels very different. This is the beginning of genuine understanding. Not the loud kind that demands immediate action, but the quiet kind that settles in and reshapes behavior naturally. You don't force yourself to change. You change because your perception has shifted, because what once felt threatening now feels understandable. Take a moment to notice this shift, the way awareness softened the pattern, the way naming chaos removed its grip, the way structure transformed from an enemy into an ally. This is not the end of the journey, but it is an important threshold. Beyond this point, growth feels less like struggle and more like alignment. And from here, the conversation deepens. Because once awareness has lifted the fog, you're ready to explore how this understanding can translate into lasting peace, not by doing more, but by building wisely beneath what you already do. As understanding deepens, struggle itself begins to look different. What once felt like evidence of failure slowly reveals another purpose. The uneven months, the anxiety, the constant effort that never quite delivered peace. None of it was wasted. It was information. It was feedback. It was life pointing, again and again, to something that numbers alone could not solve. Wisdom often arrives this way, not through success, but through the quiet exhaustion of repeating what no longer works. Many people spend years chasing external success, believing that once it is achieved, inner steadiness will naturally follow. The promotion, the business growth, the impressive income, surely these will calm the restless mind. But experience teaches a humbling lesson. External success without internal steadiness feels hollow. It looks strong, but it does not feel secure. And when challenges arrive, as they always do, there is nothing solid beneath the surface to absorb the shock. This is why two people with the same income can experience money so differently. One feels calm, measured, and capable of weathering uncertainty. The other feels constantly on edge, as if everything could unravel at any moment. The difference is not intelligence or ambition, it is internal steadiness. Without it, success becomes something you defend rather than something you inhabit. Imagine walking into a dark room. The furniture hasn't changed. The walls are the same. The obstacles are still there. But your body reacts differently the moment a small candle is lit. Your shoulders drop. Your breathing slows. You move with more confidence. The room didn't change, but your experience of it did. The light didn't remove uncertainty. It made it navigable. This is what systems do. They are that candle. They don't eliminate risk, volatility, or unpredictability. Life remains complex. Income still fluctuates. But the presence of structure changes how you feel inside that complexity. Systems create orientation. They give you reference points. They allow you to move through uncertainty without bracing for impact at every step. What's striking is how modest these systems often are. They are not dramatic overhauls or rigid controls. They are small, steady practices that quietly hold things in place. A clear flow of money, a predictable rhythm, a defined buffer between today and tomorrow. These things rarely look impressive from the outside, but they transform the inner experience profoundly. As this understanding settles, a paradox becomes clear. Releasing panic creates more space for growth. When you stop reacting to every fluctuation, your energy is freed. You think longer term. You act with intention rather than urgency. Growth stops feeling like survival and starts feeling like expansion. Ironically, calm becomes an asset. This is difficult to accept at first, especially for those who have learned to equate anxiety with responsibility. Panic can feel like proof that you care, that you are alert, that you are doing your job. But panic narrows focus. It shortens time horizons. It makes everything feel immediate and fragile. Letting go of it doesn't mean becoming careless. It means becoming capable. When constant defense fades, progress finally becomes visible. You begin to feel the ground beneath your efforts. Success doesn't slip through your fingers as quickly because you're not gripping it so tightly. You can enjoy good months without immediately fearing their end. You can face challenges without assuming they threaten your entire future. This doesn't happen because life became easier, but because you became steadier. There is also a quiet dignity that returns at this stage. You stop outsourcing your sense of safety to outcomes you cannot fully control. Instead, safety becomes something you participate in creating through clarity, through rhythm, through systems that support you even when motivation fades. This restores a sense of authorship over your life that anxiety quietly eroded. You may notice that decisions begin to feel cleaner, less emotionally charged. You choose not from fear, but from alignment. You say no without guilt. You pause without panic. You trust yourself not because you predict everything perfectly, but because you've built something that can absorb imperfection. This trust is subtle, but it is powerful. What emerges here is not indifference, but confidence, not arrogance, but quiet assurance. You care deeply, but you are no longer consumed by what might go wrong. You prepare without obsessing. You plan without clenching. The future remains unknown, but it no longer feels hostile. As this section draws to a close, allow yourself to rest in this calm for a moment. Notice how wisdom has reshaped struggle into understanding, how systems have shifted from feeling restrictive to feeling supportive, how releasing panic has made room for growth you can actually feel. This is not the end of the journey, but it is a place of integration. From here, the path forward becomes gentler, less about fixing what's broken and more about strengthening what's already holding you. The conversation now turns toward weaving these insights together, allowing structure, clarity, and peace to coexist naturally in everyday life. And in that weaving, something quietly remarkable begins to take shape. As these ideas begin to settle, something quiet but important happens. What once felt fragmented, emotion here, money there, effort in one place, and anxiety in another, starts to come together. You begin to see how emotion, structure, clarity, and peace are not separate pursuits, but parts of the same system. When one is neglected, the others strain. When they are aligned, life feels less like a constant negotiation and more like a steady rhythm. The original conflict returns here, but it no longer carries the same weight. That familiar anxiety, working hard, earning well, yet never feeling secure, still exists as a memory, but it's softened by understanding. You can now see it for what it was, not a personal failure, but a mismatch between motion and foundation. The fear that once felt overwhelming now feels informative, even instructive. It pointed you toward something that needed attention. This is where income is finally seen clearly, not as a promise, not as a verdict, not as proof of worth or failure, but as flow. Money comes in, moves through, and goes out, much like energy. When flow is treated as a foundation, it feels unstable. When flow is given a container, it becomes useful. Systems are that container. They give income direction, purpose, and continuity beyond the moment it arrives. Think of water poured into your hands. No matter how much you receive, it slips through quickly. But pour that same water into a vessel, and suddenly it can be stored, measured, shared, and used intentionally. The water didn't change. The container did. In the same way, income doesn't magically create peace on its own. It needs structure to become something you can rely on. As this perspective takes hold, something subtle shifts in daily life. Practical decisions and inner experience stop pulling in opposite directions. You no longer feel like you're betraying your peace to be responsible, or betraying your ambition to feel calm. The inner and outer worlds begin to cooperate. You plan with clarity. You act with intention. You rest without guilt. Life starts to feel less divided. This alignment brings relief, not because everything is perfect, but because it makes sense. You know why you do what you do. You understand the role each decision plays. There is less mental clutter, fewer internal arguments, and more quiet confidence. You're no longer reacting to money as if it's a constant threat. You're engaging with it as a tool within a larger design. And it's here that a simple truth crystallizes. One that changes how everything else is interpreted. Stability is not earned through effort alone. It is designed. You don't grind your way into safety. You build it deliberately through structure that holds you when motivation fades, through clarity that guides you when emotion flares, through systems that work quietly in the background while you live your life. This realization is deeply reassuring. It means you don't have to prove yourself endlessly to feel secure. You don't have to stay tense to stay responsible. You don't have to outrun uncertainty forever. Stability becomes something you participate in creating rather than something you chase in the distance. That shift alone can release years of accumulated tension. You may notice your body responding before your mind fully catches up. Breathing feels easier. Decisions feel less rushed. The future feels less like a looming test and more like an open path. The constant hum of vigilance quiets, replaced by a steady awareness. This is coherence. The feeling that your actions, values, and inner state are finally aligned. Importantly, this does not mean life becomes risk-free or predictable. Uncertainty remains a part of being human. Income can still fluctuate. Challenges will still arise. But the difference is profound. You are no longer meeting these realities from a place of fear. You are meeting them from a place of structure, from preparedness rather than panic, from clarity rather than chaos. At this stage, the urge to be instructed fades. You don't need rigid rules or prescriptive steps. Understanding itself has become stabilizing. Reflection replaces urgency. Curiosity replaces self-criticism. You begin asking better questions, not because you're lost, but because you're grounded enough to explore. This is why the transition here is gentle. There is nothing to force, nothing to rush. The foundation is already taking shape beneath your awareness. You're not being asked to overhaul your life overnight. You're simply being invited to notice how much lighter things feel when structure and emotion work together instead of against each other. Let yourself sit in this moment of integration. Notice how the story has changed. Not the facts of your life, but the meaning you assign to them. Income is no longer the hero or the villain. Effort is no longer the only line of defense. Safety is no longer something you hope to stumble upon someday. It is something you design quietly and deliberately in the background of your life. And from this place of coherence, reflection, becomes natural. Not because you're unsure of what comes next, but because you finally have the space to feel what has already changed. At this point, the conversation naturally turns inward, not to analyze or correct, but to soften. You begin to revisit that earlier anxiety, the quiet tension that once followed you through good months and bad, with a different quality now. Instead of frustration or judgment, there is compassion. You see how hard you were trying to feel safe, how much effort you poured into holding everything together. And for the first time, you don't criticize yourself for it. What's striking is how much has changed without force. There was no dramatic breakthrough, no single moment where everything snapped into place. The shift happened gently, almost invisibly. Your perception adjusted, and behavior followed. The anxiety that once felt overwhelming now feels understandable. It hasn't vanished completely, but it no longer defines the landscape of your inner life. You begin to notice this in the way you respond to familiar triggers. A slow month doesn't immediately spiral into panic. A good month doesn't instantly trigger fear of loss. The old reactions still knock, but they're quieter now. You don't slam the door on them, and you don't let them take over the house. You acknowledge them, listen briefly, and continue moving with intention. This is what it looks like to acknowledge fear rather than fight it. Fighting fear gives it energy. Acknowledging it gives you clarity. You no longer argue with yourself for feeling insecure despite outward success. You don't tell yourself you should be grateful or tougher or more disciplined. Instead, you allow the feeling to exist without turning it into a story about your inadequacy. Self-blame begins to loosen its grip here. You see that feeling unsafe was not a personal flaw, but a natural response to unpredictability. Anyone placed in a constantly shifting environment would feel the same. This realization is quietly liberating. It replaces harsh self-talk with understanding, and understanding creates space for healing. In that space, peace starts to feel possible. Not the dramatic, permanent peace promised by slogans and shortcuts, but a realistic, livable peace. The kind that coexists with uncertainty. The kind that doesn't require perfect conditions to survive. You realize that calm doesn't need everything to be solved. It just needs enough structure to breathe. This is a subtle but profound shift. Peace is no longer postponed until the future. It's no longer something you earn after checking every box. It becomes something you practice in the present, even when life is still unfolding. You stop waiting for certainty to relax, and instead, you relax into what you can hold steady right now. Freedom takes on a new meaning here. It's no longer about eliminating all risk or guaranteeing outcomes. It's not about reaching a point where nothing can go wrong. Freedom becomes internal steadiness, the ability to remain grounded regardless of external fluctuation, the ability to respond thoughtfully instead of reactively, the ability to trust yourself even when circumstances are imperfect. This kind of freedom is quieter than the version we're often sold, but far more durable. It doesn't depend on markets, income streams, or timing. It depends on your relationship with uncertainty, and that relationship has changed. Where uncertainty once felt like a threat, it now feels like a condition to be navigated. You may notice that this steadiness shows up in unexpected places, in conversations where you're less defensive, in decisions where you're less rushed, in moments of rest that no longer feel undeserved. These are small shifts, but they compound. They signal that your nervous system is learning a new pattern. There is also a gentleness that enters your inner dialogue. You speak to yourself with more patience. You allow progress to be gradual. You stop demanding constant proof that you're doing okay. Instead, you begin to trust the quiet evidence accumulating beneath the surface, the way things feel less frantic, the way choices feel less charged. This doesn't mean fear never returns. It does. But now, when it does, it's met with context rather than catastrophe. You understand where it comes from. You know what it's responding to. And because of that, it doesn't hijack your behavior, it informs you, then steps aside. As this section draws to a close, notice the quality of this moment. There is no urgency here, no pressure to act, just a sense of grounded presence, like a deep breath you didn't realize you were holding. Your shoulders soften, your thoughts slow. The constant hum quiets, even if only slightly. That quiet matters. It's not the absence of challenge, it's the presence of capacity. Capacity to face what comes next without bracing. Capacity to trust the structures you've begun to build, both internally and externally. Capacity to live with money without letting it define your worth or dictate your emotional state. Stay here for a moment. Let this calm settle. Because this is what reconnection feels like. Not dramatic relief, but gentle acceptance. And from this place, the next reflection unfolds naturally, not as a demand for change, but as an invitation to deepen what has already begun. As reflection deepens, something unexpected begins to surface. Gratitude, not the loud, performative kind, but a quieter appreciation for the journey itself. Even the discomfort starts to make sense. The anxiety, the effort, the years spent trying to feel secure through motion alone, they weren't wasted. They shaped awareness. They clarified what didn't work so that something truer could finally emerge. There is humility in this realization. You begin to see how little control was ever truly required, and how much of your energy went into trying to manage what could never be fully managed. The future was always uncertain, no matter how closely you watched it. And yet, life continued. You adapted. You found ways forward. The fear that once felt necessary now looks excessive in hindsight, not because it was foolish, but because it was overburdened with responsibility it never needed to carry. This humility is freeing. It softens the grip you once held on outcomes. You no longer believe you must anticipate every problem to be safe. You don't feel compelled to predict every turn of the road. Instead, you trust your ability to respond when needed. That trust doesn't come from arrogance or blind optimism. It comes from lived experience. You've already survived uncertainty. You've already navigated imperfection. Inner peace begins to take a more realistic form here. It's no longer imagined as a permanent state of calm or a flawless financial picture. Peace coexists with uncertainty now. It sits comfortably beside unanswered questions, variable income, and imperfect systems. You stop waiting for everything to line up before allowing yourself to feel settled. Peace becomes a companion, not a destination. There is also a noticeable change in pace. A poetic slowness enters your life, almost without effort. Money becomes quieter. It no longer demands constant commentary or emotional reaction. It still matters, but it doesn't dominate. Life feels clearer, not because it's simpler, but because fewer things are fighting for your attention at once. You may notice this slowness in small ways. You pause before reacting. You take an extra breath before making decisions. You allow moments to unfold instead of rushing through them. The mind, once always a few steps ahead, defending the future, begins to rest in the present, not out of complacency, but out of confidence. This is a subtle but profound shift. The future no longer feels like something you must constantly protect yourself from. It becomes something you can meet when it arrives. Preparation replaces worry. Awareness replaces vigilance. You don't abandon planning. You simply stop letting it consume you. Calm awareness settles in. Not the kind that numbs you, but the kind that sharpens perception without tension. You become more attuned to what matters and less reactive to what doesn't. Emotional swings flatten. Highs are enjoyed without fear. Lows are handled without catastrophe. Life begins to feel more spacious. In this space, you recognize how much of your stress came not from circumstances, but from the story you told yourself about those circumstances. The belief that you had to be constantly alert to deserve safety. The idea that rest was risky. The assumption that peace was something earned only after everything else was secured. Letting go of those stories doesn't make you less responsible. It makes you more human. There is a quiet dignity in this stage of the journey. You are no longer trying to prove anything, not to others, not to yourself. You don't need constant validation from numbers or outcomes. You measure progress differently now by how steady you feel, how clear your decisions are, how present you remain even when things are uncertain. This doesn't mean ambition disappears. It matures. It becomes less frantic and more intentional. You still grow, still build, still care deeply about your future, but you do so from a place of steadiness rather than fear. Growth feels like expansion, not escape. As this section gently prepares you for the final wisdom ahead, take a moment to notice where you are now compared to where you began. The anxiety that once defined your relationship with money has softened into understanding. The urgency has given way to clarity. The tension has eased into presence. You are not finished. Life will continue to test and stretch you, but you are better equipped now, not because you've eliminated uncertainty, but because you've learned how to live with it without losing yourself. That is a form of wealth rarely discussed, but deeply felt. Sit with this calm for a moment longer. Let the slowness linger. Let the quiet speak. Because from this place of grounded awareness, the final wisdom does not arrive as instruction or command. It arrives as recognition of what has already been learned, integrated, and quietly lived. As this journey draws toward its natural close, it becomes clear that what has shifted is not just how you think about money, but how you relate to life itself. The path you've walked here was never really about earning more, optimizing harder, or reaching some distant milestone. It was about moving from chasing numbers to building foundations. From believing safety was something you arrive at to understanding it is something you quietly construct beneath your feet. For a long time, numbers felt like the answer. More income promised relief. Higher figures hinted at peace. Bigger months seemed like proof that things were finally working. But numbers, by nature, are restless. They rise and fall. They reflect motion, not stability. And tying your sense of safety to something that constantly moves is a recipe for permanent tension. What you've come to see is simple but profound. Income does not create safety. Systems do. This truth doesn't belong only to money. It echoes across every area of human life. We build homes not just with walls, but with structure that holds those walls in place. We find calm not by eliminating all uncertainty, but by creating routines that ground us inside it. We grow not by relying on bursts of motivation, but by designing habits that carry us forward when motivation fades. Structure has always been the quiet supporter of human progress, even when it goes unnoticed. The realization doesn't arrive with fireworks. There's no dramatic turning point or sudden feeling of having figured it all out. Instead, the understanding settles in gently, like a thought you've always known but are only now ready to accept. The urgency dissolves. The need to prove something eases. You don't feel the pressure to act immediately because clarity itself already feels stabilizing. This is the aha moment, but it's not loud. It doesn't demand celebration. It simply feels right. You recognize that safety was never meant to be conditional on constant effort, constant vigilance, or constant success. It was meant to be participatory, something you engage with daily through small, steady choices, something you reinforce through design, not willpower. When safety is participatory, it stops being fragile. It's no longer something that disappears when income dips or circumstances shift. You feel it in your ability to respond rather than react, in your confidence that you can adapt without unraveling, in your trust that life doesn't need to be perfectly predictable for you to feel grounded within it. This is where money finally returns to its proper place. It stops acting like a judge that evaluates your worth each month. It stops being a scorecard for your intelligence, discipline, or future. Instead, it becomes what it was always meant to be: a tool, useful, important, but not personal. Something you work with, not something that defines you. When money becomes a tool again, its emotional charge fades. You can look at it clearly. You can make decisions without attaching your identity to the outcome. You can plan without fear and adjust without shame. You're no longer asking money to do the impossible task of making you feel safe on its own. You've given that responsibility back to structure, clarity, and self-trust. What's striking is how much lighter life feels at this point, not because challenges have vanished, but because they no longer feel like threats to your core stability. You don't brace for impact at every turn. You don't rush ahead to defend a future that hasn't arrived. You move with a steadier pace, knowing that the ground beneath you is intentionally built. This understanding changes how you view success. Success is no longer just growth in numbers, but growth in steadiness. Not just momentum, but endurance. Not just achievement, but peace. You realize that a calm nervous system is not a luxury. It's a foundation. And like all foundations, it's built quietly, often before anyone else can see it. There is also a sense of quiet pride here, not the kind that seeks recognition, but the kind that comes from knowing you've learned something essential, something that will serve you in every season of life. When income is high, when it's uncertain, when plans work, when they need revision, the foundation remains. As you sit with this final reflection, notice how different the question feels now. It's no longer, how do I earn enough to feel safe? It's, what supports do I need so that life feels steady even when it changes? That shift alone can alter decades of decision-making. And so, the journey concludes not with instruction, but with recognition. Recognition of what truly creates security. Recognition of the quiet work that matters most. Recognition that safety was never something you were meant to chase endlessly. It was something you were meant to build, patiently, deliberately, and often long before you realized you would need it. Because in the end, safety is built quietly, long before it is needed. Thank you for staying with this reflection until the end. Not just listening, but staying present, allowing the ideas to settle rather than rushing past them. In a world that constantly asks for speed, attention, and more effort, choosing to slow down and listen deeply is its own quiet act of wisdom. This time, you gave yourself matters more than it may seem. There is nothing you need to do immediately after this, no checklist to complete, No urgency to change everything at once. The core lesson can linger gently, the way meaningful truths often do. It doesn't demand action, it invites awareness. And awareness, when it's honest and patient, has a way of reshaping behavior on its own. If there is a single thought worth carrying forward, let it be this soft reminder: peace does not grow from chasing, it grows from clarity, from understanding what truly supports you and releasing what quietly drains you, from building beneath your life instead of constantly pushing against it. Clarity doesn't shout, it steadies. You may notice in the hours or days ahead that money feels a little quieter, that decisions feel less rushed, that your body holds itself with slightly less tension. These are small signs, but they are meaningful ones. They suggest that something has shifted, not dramatically, but durably. Let this be enough for now. Let the stillness remain. Let the insights rest where they belong, without pressure or performance. Because the most lasting changes often begin this way: calmly, privately, and without applause. And as you move forward, remember this: safety is not something you chase endlessly in the distance. It is something you build, quietly and steadily, right where you are.